right, welcome everybody to our experience, the ASCP podcast. I am your host, Chad Wers, alongside Tom Hansel, and we are doing another one of our Pillars of Industry podcasts today. Very fortunate to have Rolf Schrader with us. Rolf has been a lot of things to the long-term care pharmacy industry and a lot of things to ASCP over the years. He is president number 12. I guess we would call you 12. He's been very active throughout his career in long-term care pharmacy and ASCP. He currently serves as the treasurer for ASCP, and he's done that for, I don't know, I guess the last 4 years or so, maybe longer. Certainly as long as my tenure here, and I'm thrilled that he's been part of it, has brought a lot of stability and expertise to ASCP and the foundation. So Rolf, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
And we're just going to do like, we just want to hear your story. So kind of give us your background, how you got started as a pharmacist, how you got to where you were when you were a lead at Omnicare, and then where you are today.
Oh, I don't know. It's pretty boring, but I graduated in 1970 from Purdue University. At that point in time, I was probably like most pharmacists. I thought I was either going to become a retail pharmacist and maybe own my own pharmacy one day, which is, I think, a lot of people in my class and before were still had that as a career goal, and or go into industry of some sort. At that point in time I graduated, I had a 4-year commitment because I was in the ROTC program, so I was also a commissioned second lieutenant at the same time that I graduated from pharmacy school. So I had some service time ahead of me, so I actually found it somewhat hard to get a job because nobody wanted to hire somebody that wasn't going to be around, for probably within the next year when I was going to have to go off and go do my active duty commitment. So I did find this pharmacy in South Bend, Indiana. They had some retail pharmacies, but they also had a professional store, and in the basement of their professional store, by professional I mean they did fittings and sold DME and all of those things. But in the basement they were also doing something which I never heard about in school, and that was doing unit dose systems to service nursing homes. I didn't even know what a nursing home was, I think, at that point in time, because they certainly ranged from a variety of settings. Some I found out were in old houses, and some were, new bricks and mortar buildings that were just getting started in the industry. But the owner of the chain there, a little 5-store chain, he asked me if I wanted to work in that setting, and I said sure. So as it turned out, when I went off to the service about a year later, that was at the time that the Vietnam War was just winding down. And so all of a sudden they had this influx of officers coming back into the States, and they basically told me, well, we don't need you to be a full-time officer at this point in time. We're going to put you in the reserves for 8 years, which is what I ended up doing. So I went back to work for the pharmacy. Ended up becoming the manager of it, and started growing this business called long-term care pharmacy business. And through my association, the first system that we had was the DrewStar 24-hour unit dose system, which was, I think, developed in 1969 in Ohio by DrewStar, and the owner there, his name was Ken Ralia, who actually served the term on the board of directors in the early 70s as well for ASCP. But that's also the time with DrewStar, the DrewStar system, where I first met Tim Webster, who worked for his time getting started in long-term care was with DrewStar as well. And he was a salesperson, also installer. So he wore a lot of different hats for DrewStar at that point in time. And Tim and I spent quite a bit of time together in those early days, and that's basically, I guess, my entree into long-term care. Through my, at that point in time, a few years down the road there, we decided to switch distribution systems because we didn't see that a 24-hour distribution system was really economically feasible for the reimbursement or lack of reimbursement that we were getting at that point in time. So we went to a multi 30-day supply. And along with that, we also started getting into computer systems. So my first entree, or I guess experience with other ASCP people, was at a symposium that they were sponsoring in Chicago, where they basically brought in a lot of the entrepreneurs and who had experience with computers, and I'm talking about in-house computers in the early 70s, 74s, which at that point in time, you can imagine they weren't tiny little desktop boxes. They were pretty huge machines, and but that technology was just getting started, and it's interesting that it got started in our industry. It didn't get started in the hospitals or the retail. It really got started in long-term care. And again, my first experience with other ASCP people were they had companies coming in talking about their systems, and it was, the first time I really connected, first time I ever met Rick Berman was at this particular meeting, and it was almost like, a celebrity walking into the room because everybody knew who Rick was, and I knew who he was only from the ASCP monthly updates that they used to publish at that point in time.
That's what happens when Chad walks into the room now.
Yeah, right.
Everybody.
Right.
Exactly.
But it was it was a very dynamic group. A lot of the past presidents that I met for the first time, Larry Memro, Jack Mashbitz, Milt Moskowitz. I mean, these were all the people besides Rick that were in attendance, Bob Hayes, at this meeting. And what excited me was how they saw pharmacy different than everyone else saw it. It wasn't just a retail model. It wasn't a hospital model. I mean, they were into drug distribution systems. So again, when I looked at other settings, they didn't, hospitals, they didn't have unit dose at that point in time. They were still doing vials. But our members, they were at the forefront of those types of things, not just the computers, but the drug distributions systems. But then also you ran into other pharmacists there that were primarily doing consulting in the nursing homes. I mean, this is the early 70s. This is when obviously the requirement to have a drug regimen review had just come out. These are the times when ASCP, we were trying to get recognition, reimbursement. Some of the same things we're crying for now. We were crying for back then. We want to be reimbursed for our services.
So, Rolf, let me ask you. This is an industry that has always kind of been there to support each other. And, that's a prime example here. You go here, and certainly there's some people that are recognized in the industry and have some name recognition and knowledge. But right away, right at the beginning, even back in the 70s you're talking about, they're there to help and support each other. They're there to help each other's businesses. And I believe that still exists today, but uniquely in long-term care pharmacy. Why do you think that was the way it was back then, and how we've been able to really sustain that intimate kind of support of each other over these last 40, 50 years?
Well, I think back then, first of all, it was new. Everything was so new, and people were breaking ground, whether it was in computers, whether it was in consulting, how they did it, whether it was in drug distribution. And the members weren't necessarily, at that point in time, nobody felt that they were, competing with each other, because, Larry Nemiro was in California, Rick Berman was in Boston. I mean, so it wasn't like, people, I think, were more open to share information because they weren't treading on each other's turf, so to say. But then, because everything was somewhat groundbreaking, everybody wanted to know what everybody else was doing, because how could we do it better? Was somebody doing it better? Was there a better system, better computer? What do you do when you go into a facility to do drug regimen reviews? How much time does that take you? What else do you do, in the facilities? And I think so.
I really commend you and ASCP and the leaders back then for creating that community, creating that, support and help each other. And even though we, long-term care pharmacy certainly could compete against each other, there still seems to be that collaboration. I think it's because of the ASCP mentality and kind of how they bring everyone together to help each other.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely commonality in what you're telling about the early 70s that's still happening today. I mean, where else can pharmacists get paid for, cognitive services? Like, consultants are paid to do drug regimen reviews in nursing homes. Who gets paid for packaging styles? I mean, you bring up DrewStar, and their first foray was a 24-hour packaging system. We're back to that.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's full circle now.
It's full circle.
We're trying to get decreased.
And so, like, these things have in some ways haven't changed, but this industry is as downtrodden as the skilled nursing home area sounds to the public. Like, I don't want to go there. Those places aren't. It's still this pharmacy innovation center that is critical if we're going to figure out how to care for 75 million people over the age of 65, most of which won't live in a skilled nursing home.
Yeah.
But all these things we've learned and honed and refined and innovative are going to be important for them, whether they're in an assisted living or they live in their home.
Yeah.
I had an opportunity to go back to Purdue a few times back then. And talk to one of the professors that I really held in high esteem at the university, and let him know what I was doing. And he invited me for a few years to come down and talk to the class, and this was as senior classes was the, and actually they ended up bringing the entire senior class up to our pharmacy just so that they could see what a long-term care pharmacy does. And again, this was in the early mid 70s at that point in time. And but the students asked me, you know, what I liked about the setting that I was practicing in, and I said, well, I told them, I said, it was really from everything that we learned in school. We didn't learn how to count pills. We learned the clinical education that we got. I said, to me, this is the only setting where I can actually apply everything I've learned as a pharmacist, from a clinical standpoint, from a drug standpoint, and put it into practice. And when my first foray of going into a nursing home, and that's when, even before you were required to go into a nursing home as a pharmacist, you might go in to check the PRN box or the outdated, dating on drugs, but you didn't really have, at that point in time, a requirement that came a year or two later to actually do drug regimen reviews. But the staff there, the director of nurses, the charge nurses, a pharmacist coming in to the facility, they just sort of gravitated. And it was hard to get let out of the building because they really thought you brought some value, because they asked you about this patient or that patient, and the drugs that they were on. And at that point in time, certainly one of the main things that we used to check was probably for interactions between the various drugs that they were on. And so, they were reaching out to us, and for the most part, the doctors really didn't have a problem with it either, because they weren't in there all the time. Which again is why I think we always, promote the fact that the pharmacist in the building is in these buildings, and should be considered, a valuable healthcare member of the healthcare team. And so I think that's probably what gave me the most satisfaction, just being in the
part of their team,
the facilities, and feeling like really we're having an impact,
making a difference. Absolutely.
We have this like dichotomy in long-term care of consultants and pharmacy operators. That you were in operations or you were a consultant. I think if you go back to the beginning, and certainly you can speak to this, there wasn't that sort of perceived split. To hear you talk about what was important to you as a pharmacist and as your career progressed, and talk about those clinical things, and recognize that a lot of people would say, Rolf Schrader, oh, he was a bigwig at Omnicare. He's an operator. This guy is an operator. It's not about clinical things necessarily with what Rolf had done in his career. Can you speak to that? Because I think we still have some of those sort of factions lined up, that you have to be either on the operations side and you're a business person, or you're on the consulting side and you're a clinician, and there's really a little crossover, when the reality is there's a lot. But
even amongst the same pharmacy, the same
right.
pharmacist.
What's your perspective on that?
I think they two went together hand in hand, especially back then. The drug distribution system that the pharmacy was providing was the entree into the facility. And the need for the pharmacist that probably at that point in time was working for the pharmacy to help manage the medications in the facility, I think was joined. Those two functions were sort of joined together, uh, based on the fact that, very frankly, the pharmacy was supporting, from a financial standpoint, a pharmacist being in there, because there really wasn't payment for services. Uh, Even some of the more, I guess, consultant only pharmacists were still associated with a pharmacy. Uh, and I don't think there were any that were doing it gratis,
Right.
just going because they wanted to go into the nursing home.
What I think is funny about that is I have this sort of thought process about what does a community pharmacist look like in another 10 years, maybe even 15 years. And to me, it looks like the origins of long-term care. To me, a pharmacist at some point is going to have a number of patients in the community that they have as patients. They're going to coordinate the pharmacy that delivers that medication to them in some sort of packaging. They're going to sync it. They're going to meet with that person on a routine basis. Maybe it's not every month, but some routine basis. And they're going to be sort of the pharmacy without a store.
Right.
The store is going to be, a production pharmacy somewhere that packages the way that pharmacist thinks is important for that patient. And there's going to be that relationship between the pharmacist doing that work and that pharmacy, just like there was at the beginning of long-term care. I feel like that's one aspect of where pharmacy is, not everything, but I think that's where it's going. It just happened to start where there were 120 or 80 or 100 patients living under the same roof. It's going to end at servicing people in their homes where there might only be one or two living under that
That's
roof.
where the population's going. So Rolf, you ended up having your own long-term care pharmacy, a very large long-term care pharmacy in northern Ohio. Tell me about that transition prior to, I know you guys sold to Omnicare eventually, but kind of what incentivized you to do that and to grow the way you guys did?
Well, I ended up buying the pharmacy in Indiana that I started out with managing, and ended up, I guess, prior to all of the big mergers taking place, selling that to a local entrepreneur who actually owned nursing homes, facilities, and had his own pharmacy, a couple of his own pharmacy as well. And I worked for that organization for a few years. He ended up actually having facilities in multiple states, Florida, East Coast, Illinois, Michigan area, but then we were in a pharmacy expansion mode as well. He ended up wanting to sell his pharmacy business and just focus on his long-term, his nursing facility business after a few years. And at that point in time, I made the decision, and I guess I had an offer I couldn't refuse to come to Ohio. So I worked for a entrepreneur in Ohio who probably had one of the largest long-term care pharmacies in the state, and helped her grow to become even larger. I think a few years there, after a few years there, that's when companies like Omnicare were starting to consolidate the business. So I think West Haven, which was the name of the pharmacy that I was I guess, COO for in Ohio there. I think they were their fourth or fifth acquisition for Omnicare at that point. And I think actually it was probably the largest in terms of bed size at that point in time, but that sort of started I guess, my moving from this independent company to now a public company, because they were a public company at that point, at the time that they were starting to I guess consolidate the industry.
So you've gotten to see this world prior to these large national chains, and prior to the three-letter word PBM, and how pharmacy was prior to those two things. So I know it's evolved and changed a lot, but can you kind of, I guess, look at it side by side of how life was prior to the big national chains, prior to the PBMs, to compare to how it is now? And then are we better as an industry? Are we better in America because of these two major things, acquisitions and PBMs, or are we need to get back to our roots?
I think we already are getting back to our roots, very frankly, to some degree, maybe not so much on the PBM side, but from the standpoint of the provider side, I think when you read McKnight's and a lot of the industry newsletters, and just looking around who your competition is, I mean, even though I've been retired since 2018, I pretty much know who the, I guess, providers, long-term care providers were at the time that I left, and that's probably doubled or tripled as far as those operating inside just Ohio even at this point in time. So we're sort of going from, and I think you find that with most industry, that starts with a very, entrepreneurial type of industry, then you get into a regionalization, then to a major consolidation. It happened in the nursing home industry as well. Beverly is a prime example of that. And then there comes a peak, and then after a while, it goes back to a regional market, and then maybe now even a little bit more of an independent market, because the market, there's a lot of, I would say, maybe not independent, but there's a lot of smaller chains out there competing for the marketplace. So right now it looks more like it did 20, 30 years ago, before all that consolidation started. So that's on the provider side. The PBM side, I think maybe what might drive that change is more governmental in nature. I don't, whether it goes back to where it was before, I'm not so sure. I think there might just be a different versions of what we have now.
So to kind of follow up on Tom's question, there are few people, I think, that can say, I was there at the beginning of an industry. I've seen it go through this cycle all the way through, where it is today. How do you view the next 5, 10, 20 years of long-term care pharmacy? Like, what have you learned that you think will apply? Where do you think it's going? We've got this giant population coming. Long-term care always only represented about 2.5% of the over 65 population, but that 2.5% is going to be a much bigger number in the next 5 years. But where does it go? What happens? Prognosticate.
Well, yeah, I think there's going to continue to be more emphasis and opportunities for pharmacy and for pharmacists to involve themselves in the clinical aspects of long-term care. Not so, it's somewhat the same as retail, where you have a refill center, and then you have, the idea being in a retail, maybe the local pharmacy is going to be more direct interaction between the pharmacist and the customer, the patients, if you will. I think to some degree there's going to be more emphasis on the pharmacist as a member of the healthcare, I guess, resource, other than just the drugs themselves, is what I see it. I think, again, we have technology that's enhanced our ability to get drugs out to facilities in different packaging modes that can be customized to whatever type of facility we're dealing with, whether that's assisted living, long-term care, whether it's the acute care within long-term care, or the patients that are there on a longer-term basis. So I think, or I see the pharmacists continuing to evolve is just, again, as a medication manager, a drug resource, and maybe even more of a member of the healthcare team than they have been even in the past.
I think everybody would be happy to see that.
Yeah. So Rolf, would you do it again? You've been through this, now in this setting. Would you open up a long-term care pharmacy and start in the basement again?
If I was, 50 years younger, yeah, maybe. I would, yeah. I still have no regrets. I think I'm blessed that I lucked my way into, I guess, being in this industry. I never really grew tired of it. Just because of the people that I was involved with, both from the peers that I was involved with, but also with the people that I worked with, meaning the administrators and nurses of the facilities that we serviced. Relationships that I developed with many of them. The fact that, I think they felt that they needed pharmacy, they needed a pharmacist to help them with taking care of their patients. So no, I have no regrets. If I was younger, I'd do it again, and I think it's going to be a career path for pharmacy for some time to come. I just hope. I guess the one regret I have is that still trying to get a lot of our schools of pharmacy to acknowledge that, this is really, if you want 6 years, 7 years of education, if you're going to give 6, 7, 8 years of education to your students, you should want to put them into a place where they can practice, what they've gained for those. And to me, the best practice overall is in the long-term care market.
Absolutely.
Good. It's great.
Yeah. Well, Rolf, we're thrilled that you could spend time with us and walk us through what's mattered to you as a pharmacist in your career. Just as an aside, we certainly are thankful for you from an association perspective and all the work that you do with ASCP as treasurer and through the foundation. I think what you've commented on today should resonate with that next generation of pharmacists. If somebody like you says, if I were 50 years younger, I would start a pharmacy, then it should tell the youth of our profession that, hey, you should start a pharmacy. Like, there's opportunity here. And I think they need to hear that. And to your point, we need to be a lot more assertive at making sure they understand what this aspect of healthcare brings. We're not, with all due respect to big chain drugstores, that's not the environment that we have in long-term care. And we're thankful for that. And it also represents, you should be seeking us out to get jobs and work in an industry that is fulfilling and not, maybe not so, threatening or damaging or
just demanding,
physically demanding, physically. Yeah.
Yeah. So, use what you went to school for, which that clinical base, the knowledge there, and whether you're dispensing or not, you're still using your clinical resource and your clinical education to make that patient better. So, Rolf, thank you so much for being an icon in this industry. I mean, I've got to know you personally over the last several years, but anybody that hasn't gotten to know you personally, I can tell you that you certainly were a mentor of mine back when I was a young baby pharmacist at Omnicare, and I said, I want to be Rolf Schrader someday when I grow up. And so I never really did that in Omnicare, but certainly have always just appreciated and watched you from afar and gotten to know you personally over the years and just have a bunch of respect for you. So thank you for what you've done for this industry and for ASCP.
Absolutely.
Thanks for asking me.
Well, I also just a last aside is that, and you brought this up, Rolf, in the beginnings of this organization. We're an approachable organization. This is an organization where the members do collaborate and talk to each other and help each other. And you'll see Rolf in Denver at our annual meeting in November. You'll see Rolf at our fly-in. You'll see Rolf potentially at some regional meetings. So we're an accessible group, and I think that lends itself to teaching that next generation about our industry and how to get involved. Thanks again.
Right.
Thank you.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
We'll see everybody next time on Our Experience.